Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience. Viewer discretion is advised. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to question everything about my marriage. But here I am, sitting in the dark, replaying the moment my husband convinced me to do something I never imagined. Even now, my hands are shaking just thinking about it. It all started on an ordinary evening. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, when Daniel walked in with that look, the one that always meant he had something on his mind. He hesitated for a second before he finally said, "I have an idea, but I need you to trust me." His voice was calm, too calm, and that should have been my first warning. Daniel and I had been married for 5 years. We knew each other's habits, strengths, and weaknesses. He was my best friend, my partner in everything. But that night, something felt different. He sat across from me, his eyes locked onto mine, waiting for my response. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. "What is it?" I asked, forcing a small laugh, trying to ease whatever was coming next. But the moment he spoke, my stomach dropped. I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. At first, I thought he was joking. He had to be. There was no way he could be serious. But then I saw it, the way he leaned forward, his fingers tapping nervously on the table, his jaw tight. He meant it, every single word. I wanted to say no. I should have said no. But the way he looked at me, the way he made it sound so reasonable, so necessary, I found myself hesitating. I found myself considering it. And that was my first mistake, because once you take that first step, there's no turning back. I wish I could go back to that night and change everything. I wish I had listened to my gut instead of letting love cloud my judgment. Because now, standing in the aftermath of it all, I can't help but wonder, was it really love that made me say yes? Or was it something else entirely? But by the time I figured it out, it was already too late. I remember the silence that followed after I nodded. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt peaceful. It was thick, heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Daniel reached for my hand, squeezing it gently, as if he could already sense the hesitation creeping into my mind. "You trust me, right?" he asked, his voice low, almost urgent. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "Of course I do." And I meant it. At least, I thought I did. We had always been a team, always stood by each other no matter what. But something about this didn't feel right. That night, I barely slept. I kept staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Was I overthinking it? Was I making it a bigger deal than it needed to be? Daniel had a way of making things seem simple, logical, even when they weren't. He always had a plan, always thought ahead. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if his confidence was reassuring or terrifying. The next morning, he acted like everything was normal. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving for work, his usual routine. But as soon as the door shut behind him, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I needed to talk to someone, to say it out loud just to hear how crazy it sounded. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over my best friend's name. But before I could press call, a message popped up on my screen. It was from Daniel. "Remember, we're in this together." I stared at those words, my heart pounding. That was the moment I knew this was bigger than I had realized. And there was no going back now. I sat there staring at the message, my chest tightening. "We're in this together." The words should have been comforting, but they felt more like a warning. What exactly had I agreed to? And why did it feel like I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't escape? For the rest of the day, I went through the motions, answering emails, making coffee, folding laundry, but my mind kept circling back to Daniel. The way he looked at me last night, the urgency in his voice, The way he made me feel like saying no wasn't an option. By the time he got home, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was just letting my imagination run wild. Maybe it wasn't as serious as it seemed. But when he walked through the door, his expression sent a chill down my spine. He was tense, distracted, barely meeting my eyes as he set his keys down. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He hesitated for just a second, just long enough for me to notice. "Yeah, just a long day." I wanted to push him, to ask him what was really going on, but something stopped me. Maybe I didn't want to hear the answer. Maybe I wasn't ready. That night, I lay awake again, listening to his breathing. He fell asleep so easily, like nothing was wrong. But I knew better. I could feel the weight of whatever he wasn't saying pressing down on both of us. And it wasn't just in my head. Small things started to change. Daniel was always careful with money, but suddenly he was more secretive. He'd take calls in the other room, whispering just low enough that I couldn't make out the words. He started coming home later, brushing it off with vague excuses. And then there was the way he looked at me, like he was waiting for me to break, to back out of whatever this was. One evening, I finally reached my breaking point. "Daniel, I need to know what's going on," I said, standing in the kitchen as he poured himself a drink. He didn't answer right away. He just swirled the liquid in his glass, watching it like it held the answer. Then he sighed, setting the glass down with a quiet clink. "You said you trusted me," he murmured. "I do," I said, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. "Then just a little longer, I promise. It'll all make sense soon." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew that whatever was coming next, it wasn't something I could take back. The days that followed felt like walking on the edge of a cliff. One wrong step away from falling into something I couldn't escape. Daniel became even more distant, his mind somewhere else even when he was sitting right beside me. And the worst part, I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own home. Every night I lay awake, waiting for him to tell me the truth, to let me in on whatever had taken over his thoughts. But he never did. Instead, he kept repeating the same thing, just a little longer. But how much longer was I supposed to wait? How much longer before this secret swallowed us both whole? Then, one evening, everything changed. Daniel came home later than ever. His shirt was wrinkled, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't look at me when he walked through the door, didn't say a word. He just went straight to the kitchen, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. I felt my stomach twist. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" He exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter. "It's happening," he muttered, almost to himself. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. "What do you mean?" He turned to me then, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I need you to come with me, now." Everything inside me screamed to say no, to demand answers before taking another step. But the way he looked at me, it wasn't just desperation, it was fear. And in that moment, I realized, whatever was happening, we were already past the point of no return. I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Come with you where?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Daniel hesitated, running a hand through his hair. His usual calm, the confidence that had always been so unshakable, was gone. "I can't explain, not yet. You just have to trust me." I wanted to fight him on it, to demand the answers I deserved. But something about the way he looked at me, the tightness in his jaw, the weight in his eyes, made my breath catch in my throat. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about us anymore. It was bigger. I grabbed my coat, and without another word, I followed him out the door. The drive was tense, silent. Daniel gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Streetlights flickered past in a blur, the world outside feeling strangely distant, unreal. I kept my eyes on him, searching for any hint of what was going through his mind, but he wouldn't look at me. Then, finally, he spoke. I never wanted you to be involved in this. I swallowed hard. In what, Daniel? His fingers tightened around the wheel. I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought if I kept you out of it, I could fix everything before it got to this point. Dread coiled in my stomach. What point? Instead of answering, he pulled the car into a dimly lit parking lot, cutting the engine. My pulse quickened as I looked around. The place was nearly empty, just a few scattered cars, a streetlight buzzing overhead. Nothing about it made sense. Then I noticed the figure standing near the far edge of the lot. A man, his face hidden in the shadows. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge us, but I could feel it. He was waiting for us. Daniel exhaled and finally turned to me. Stay here, he said. No, I shot back immediately. Not until you tell me what's going on. He hesitated, but before he could answer, the man started walking toward us. My stomach twisted. Something about him, the way he moved, the way Daniel tensed beside me, sent a wave of cold fear down my spine. Daniel opened the door and stepped out. I followed before he could stop me. The man's face came into view under the streetlight, sharp features, cold eyes, a look that sent shivers through me. You're late, the man said, his voice low, unreadable. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. It took longer than I expected. The man's gaze flicked to me. And her? Daniel stepped in front of me. She's with me. That's all you need to know. The man let out a short, humorless laugh. That's not how this works. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. I didn't know who this man was, but I knew one thing. Daniel had lied to me. This wasn't something he had just gotten involved in. This had been going on for a long time, and now, whether I wanted to be or not, I was part of it too. Daniel's entire body tensed as the man took a step closer. I could feel the weight of unspoken words between them, a history I hadn't been told. My heart pounded as I grabbed Daniel's arm. Tell me the truth, I whispered. The man smirked, eyes flicking between us. She doesn't know, does she? He shook his head, amused. All this time, and you still couldn't bring yourself to tell her. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's enough. I stepped back, shaking my head. Tell me what, Daniel? My voice cracked, fear creeping in. The man let out a slow sigh. You're in deeper than you think, sweetheart. Then, turning to Daniel, he added, but I'll give you one last chance. Are you in or out? Daniel didn't answer right away. His hand clenched into a fist, his breathing sharp and uneven. Then, to my shock, he pulled something from his pocket, a small flash drive. He tossed it to the man. This is everything. It's over. The man caught it effortlessly, examining it with a smirk. Over? You think they'll let you walk away that easily? Daniel didn't flinch. They will if they know what's good for them. The man stared at him for a long moment before chuckling. You always were full of surprises. Then he turned, disappearing into the shadows. I exhaled, my legs trembling. Daniel? Before I could finish, his phone buzzed. He looked down, his face going pale. He turned the screen toward me. Unknown number. You really thought this was the end? And just like that, I knew this wasn't over. It had only just begun. Daniel's fingers tightened around his phone, his knuckles white. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the hope that this was over, crushed by the reality staring back at him. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. What does this mean? He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. It means they're not done with me. The weight of those words settled deep in my chest. I had spent weeks questioning what was happening, feeling like I was being dragged into something I didn't understand. And now, standing here with Daniel, knowing that even after everything, it wasn't truly over, I felt helpless. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Then what do we do now? Daniel looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something familiar in his expression. It wasn't fear or desperation, it was determination. We move forward, we stop running, stop hiding, we face it head on. His words sent a chill through me, but at the same time, they grounded me. Daniel had spent so much time keeping me in the dark, trying to protect me from something I was already a part of. But not anymore. If we were in this together, then I needed to know everything. The next morning, Daniel told me the truth, every single detail, about the people he was involved with, about the decisions he had made, about why he had kept me out of it for so long. It wasn't easy to hear, and there were moments when I felt like walking away, like maybe it would be safer to pretend none of this had happened. But I knew that wasn't an option. So instead, we planned. We figured out what came next, how to get out for good. It wouldn't be easy, and we both knew the risks. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The message from the unknown number still haunted me, a reminder that our past wouldn't let us go so easily. But as I sat beside Daniel, his hand in mine, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was coming next, we would face it together, and that was the only way we would ever be free.